Okay, over here on my screen, I'm using OpenAI's Playground. So for those of you who are not familiar with Playground, I'll suggest you to start using it if you're serious about learning prompt engineering. This is basically a free tool by OpenAI. There are some costs to it, but it comes along with the different models that you use over here. That said, they are not expensive at all. It costs something like a few cents per 1,000 tokens of usage. So do use it if you want to run some experiments. But nonetheless, let's begin with some basic settings in Playground. So the settings are all on the right side panel. So over here under mode, you can choose or toggle between 3 different modes. So we have complete, edit, and chat. And the complete mode right now, along with the edit mode, it's legacy modes, while the chat mode, which was previously in beta, is now fully rolled out. I personally only use chat and complete. Right, so just a glimpse of what the chat mode is like. It's basically something like that. So it's very much similar with Chatgpt, except that it has visible settings over here on the right side, and also a kind of like a system prompt field over here where you can input more background information, background context, or maybe you want to just get the model to assume a particular role, like this example over here. Right, so and of course the settings here are the basic settings. You can choose between the different models here as well. All these settings can be also adjusted in the Chatgpt, the usual Chatgpt that you're using, except that you might have to do it in the form of a prompt. So one very good example is something like that. So give me 5 names of my cat with 3 legs, and then you type in the setting temperature 0.1. So by doing this prompt, right, is essentially the same as setting a temperature to 0.1. So that's about it for the chat mode. For complete mode, I usually used it, especially for today's example. We will be using this complete mode because it's more simpler. It is basically an autocomplete function where you key in some text over here, and they will just base on this preceding text over here to generate a certain output after that, right? So it's something like filling in the gap for you. Okay, so under complete mode, there are several settings that you can find over here on the right side. We will only be covering about 20% of these settings because these are the settings that you will use 80% of the time. Right, so let's begin with our first setting, which is on maximum length. So maximum length is pretty important as it's directly tied to token usage. So this is a setting you want to use to control how long or short you want to limit responses. Couple that the main reason why you want to limit your response is due to token usage, and there are 2 factors to token usage. The first factor is cost, and the second is token limits. So when it comes to cost, remember we talked about different models have different charges. So the charges that we are talking about here are actually based on the number of tokens you use. And in order to see how many tokens you use, you need to know that 1 token is roughly about 4 English characters as per the description in brackets over here. So if you key in a particular long string of tags, all these tags would actually be converted into tokens. So maybe this is 1 token, this is 2 token, and 3 token, and so on. So rough estimate is about 4 characters. And that includes your spaces, your symbols, which is like your periods, your question mark, exclamation mark, and so on. And of course your numbers as well. So the second factor is token limits. Each model here also all comes with a different token limit, especially when you're using the chat mode, right, where you have GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, they all also have a token limit. So the maximum length that you can go for this, in this case, is 4,000. So as you can read in the description as well, 4,000 tokens are shared between both prompts and completion, meaning to say whatever input that you have typed into the text box over here, followed by whatever that is generated, right, all adds up. The maximum you can go is about 4,000. Alright, so it counts towards both your prompts and generation. So using up these tokens, using up your token limit is very unlikely unless you're planning to generate a lot of text. So the worst case scenario would be that if you use up all your tokens, what would probably happen is that your output might get truncated, or the AI would just forget your initial inputs. So I'm not sure if you have noticed this when you're using Chatgpt as well. Chatgpt, they tend to also limit the responses. So they do have a maximum length setting so that you do not over exceed whatever limit that the model has. And sometimes if you have a huge chunk of text that's being generated, right, if you go back to refer to the first initial input, they sometimes might forget about that as well. So this is probably some of the main reasons why you want to optimize your inputs, right? So that whatever inputs that you have do count into the token usage, right? So it can affect your prompt, it can affect the outcome as well, right? So this is something that you want to take note of. One more thing to take note very quickly is this 0 in this shaded area. If you mouse over it, you can see how many tokens are in the prompts and also what is the maximum tokens in response. So right now, because the text box here is 0, so it's showing up as 0. But if I start typing something inside, this text that I have here is converted into 11 tokens. So in my prompt, there are 11 tokens. And I can only generate up to 941 tokens in response because of the maximum length that I've set over here. So by adjusting this number here, it will also adjust the number accordingly in the description here. So right now you see an error, and this is also because in one single request, right, there is only a maximum of 4,000 tokens. I already have 11 in the prompt, so I will be using more than 4,000, hence the error. So you just simply need to just reduce it and you will be fine. Yeah, that's about it for the maximum length. Okay, so the second setting that we are talking about here is temperature. Okay, which is this setting over here. As I mentioned, models like GPT predicts the next word in the sentence based on the words it has already seen. So this temperature settings influences how the model chooses the next word. So to put things into perspective, let me just run an example. So I'm going to try something like a cat is chasing, and I'm going to let the AI auto-complete the sentence for me based on whatever that it predict, right? Before I click submit, I guess off your head, you should have already guessed an answer, right? So let's see what the AI give us. Okay, so it says here a cat is chasing a mouse, and off my head I am thinking about a mouse or rat, right? But so in this case it's pretty accurate, right? So these words here, all these words here and all these words here are prediction on the preceding text. So whatever that precedes it, this is the preceding text of a mouse, right? So it will base on the preceding text to predict the next word, right? And the temperature will affect how these words are being selected. Okay, so let me just turn on the full spectrum so that you can see it in action, and let me run it again. Okay, so right now temperature of 1, you would notice that if I click on the word, I will see a bunch of permutations or variations of the predictions that it has listed out, right? And it tells me that is 75% followed by mouse is 78%, right? So when the temperature is low, the model will exhibit higher confidence in its top choices, right? So it's selecting the ones with a higher percentages. And of course, obviously, the top choices are based on how they're trained on. So for this example, you will notice that the first or the second, which is mouse of 78% and rat of 6%, right? They often have very high probability, and especially the first one. If your temperature is low, right, the first word usually have a very high percentages as compared to the rest. So there will be a very distinct differences in the probability percentages of the different words, especially on the top choices. Okay, conversely, if the temperature exceeds 1, the model confidence of this top choice will diminish, right? And of course, if you increase the temperature further, the model samplings becomes more uniform, which then equates to total randomness. So we're going to try it out with an experiment. Let me just scale it up to 2 and let's see what it does and submit. You see that it will start giving me gibberish, right? Right, and more gibberish. Okay, so, having a temperature set to 2 generally will provide a lot more creative response, right? So if you look at the variations here, right, if I click on me, right, it selects the ones at the bottom. Okay, and if you see the other words over here, the top choices, the percentage for the top choices is actually drastically different from the first experiment that we run. You will notice that before this, the number 1 choice has a very high percentage and the rest are very low. But in this case, it starts becoming more flat. Right, you will notice that they are all about very similar percentages, and the bottom few are actually more closer to the top few in terms of percentages. Right, so because of this, the AI will pick any word as the percentages now for each of these words are very similar to one another. So it sort of becomes random. Okay, yeah, like in this case, it's a very good example. You have very, very flat percentages, unlike the first example. So in summary, if we want a very creative response, we just go above 1. Okay, if we want something that is more deterministic, more logical, we go below 1. Now, I wouldn't encourage you to take either end of the spectrum here. I would prefer to just put it between 0.75 to 1 just to get a balanced output. Okay, so with this out of the way, let's move on to the next setting, which is models. So for models, there's actually only 2 things you want to take note. Again, one is cost. As I mentioned earlier, These models, they all have different charges to it. I won't go into detail, but I'll put a link in the description below. Then you can just check it out or check out their different charges in that link. So the second factor is their use case. Like you read the description over here, they do have different strengths. It is also probably how they are being trained on. It's pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go into details, right? But just know that choosing the right model can also affect the outcome as well. In the later examples, I'm just going to use the Text DaVinci 003 because it is a more advanced model that OpenAI has. Right, so there are other settings here below. I won't go through that because they are all for fine-tuning, which we will not be doing in today's video. So I won't dive into this, but do let me know in the comment section below if you want another video on these settings.